Hello and welcome to Prime Cut, a special episode of Property-Pxrn Stars where we go through the premium section of the Voice of the Agent Survey 2025. And I'm very excited today because I'm joined by what would otherwise be the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but are the four authors of premium estate agency news are sort of here together in the same room. I'm joined virtually, first of all, by Elaine Penhaul of Lemon and Lime, who can't be with us in person because the trains have let her down today, which is a shame. But we've got you here virtually, we've got you in spirit. I'm also joined by the two Simons, Simon Gates of Opening the Gates to More Instructions for Estate Agents. More instructions or listings? Listings. We'll have to re-record the whole thing again.
Get it right, David.
I'm not doing this intro twice. And Simon Leadbetter of Unchained Marketing and, of course, the author of The Voice of the Agent Survey. So, today's episode is Prime Cut, which has become a bit of a brand, really, I think, for... Oh, the Prime Edition you've called it, not Prime Cut. I prefer Prime Cut, but you're the marketer, so we'll go with what you say.
It's for the vegetarians and vegans.
All right, okay, we're accessible like that. So we wanted to cut the edition up into some sections, but I think before we kind of get into it, first of all, Simon L., if I can kind of hand over to you, because I don't think it was a question that I asked first of all, but it was a question that was put to you maybe in another format when you were doing the full fat version of the Voice of the Agent episode like this with the likes of Chris England and so on, about how, I don't know whether it was the case for that panel, but certainly the case of this panel, that of the four of us here, we're contributors to newsletters together in the industry, coming at it from different angles, but none of us are practicing estate agents. And I thought that your response to that challenge was particularly good. So will you relive that for me, please?
Of course. I think it's a legitimate question for people to ask is, you've got a survey there called The Voice of the Agent, but when you do these discussions, there aren't agents on the panel. To be fair, we have had agents on the panel over the years, and we will have agents again. In fact, we'll be bringing a lot of agents together for an event later in the year. But my humble opinion is we have the Voice of the Agent in a report, over 1,000 responses to a survey. That's 1,000 agents. We could put 1, 2, 3 agents on the panel, but that would be a view of 1, 2, or 3 agents. We've got the view of the wisdom of the crowd of over 1,000 agents. So actually, it's people who work with agents discussing what they say collectively, rather than an agent with a strong opinion that might not be reflective of the entire community that we speak to. So yes, we will bring agents together, but for the purposes of these debates, we're talking about what over 1,000 agents have said, and then we as people who work with agents are exploring what that means to us as people who work with the industry.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And also you said something when we discussed this over the phone. You said that if there was, so we've got the voice of the agents, 1,000 of them. If there was 1 or 2 or 3 agents on this panel, their voice might sway the results of thousands of others who weren't here in person to have their say as well.
Absolutely. The average of those 1,000 is what the view of the industry is. We're an industry with strong opinions, and that's really good, and that leads to lots of really good debates. But my fear of having a panel of agents is, who do we include, who do we exclude? But exactly as you say and we discussed is, that view won't be representative, so the debate won't take a neutral view of the research. It'll be about the view of the agent, the individual, as opposed to the views we have of 1,000 agents.
Yeah, very well said. Awesome. Okay, so if we can kick off in a place that I absolutely love, but I think is indicative of why this report is so important and increasingly important, and that's for you as the author, but then also for everyone listening to this for the consideration of their own business, is this. And we'll talk about fee percentages in a minute, but what those relate to in terms of market value. So when we talk about the upper quartile of the market, what we're talking about here is properties priced 500,000 and above, right? So that is premium in some areas, slightly under premium in others, whatever it might be. But that market from £500,000 up, and this is my favourite bit, so I'm getting stuck in with the bit that I love. So that accounts for 24% of the instructions, but those 24% of all the instructions that go on in the marketplace, in terms of fees, they are 59% of all of the fees that are available in the whole of the estate agency market. So people talk about the premium as sort of as a niche market. And I said this last year, and I kind of, it was true last year. I think it was 51% last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. But now it's 59%. And appreciate that, rising house prices will have a big part to do with that. But still, for that market now to be worth getting up to 60% of every pound that's available in the marketplace is just absolutely astonishing. And I'm so excited about that.
I think, you can talk about the industry in terms of the number of instructions, and obviously 76% of the market is not, as we define it, prime properties. Upper quartile in the UK really starts at about 420, 430,000 pounds in
Right,
the UK.
okay.
But we use 500,000 as a good break to capture in some of the regional differences.
It's just so on that. So when you say what it actually starts at, that is statistically speaking, the top.
The top 25%. So if you want to look at where the value of the top 25% starts of properties in the UK, it starts at around 420, 430,000 pounds.
Right. Okay.
So, and I remember speaking to agents in the prime area who go, "Aren't most properties worth £1 million?" And you go, "No, a very small number of properties worth £1 million. Most properties are, the average property is what, £300,000 now?
Yeah, just under. Yeah.
Just under £300,000. So, and it's then a very long tail of a small number at the higher end. So, but when people talk about the market, it's the fee question. It was your question to me that made this data come out, and us to highlight it, is most of the value of the market in residential property is in the prime space. Nearly 3/4.
Yeah.
3/5.
3/5, yeah. So why do you think that is?
I think, two forces are really happening. And it's basically the double jeopardy of the prime space, or the double jeopardy of the non-prime space in reality is we have higher value properties, and as the data says, at higher fees. So they get the double win. The upper quartile gets not only higher value properties, they're the upper quartile, but they're also charging higher fees on higher properties. So the reality is they double win, that they get a really big, nice house price with a really nice fee. The opposite is also true. In the mainstream market, you're getting lower value properties at a lower fee. So eventually, and we're seeing more of a division in the market between the prime and the rest, where we're seeing higher fees and higher property values, and then there is, in the kindest possible way, the rest.
And they are the rest, yeah. And that increasingly, it's funny how when you look at the table in the results, it's flat, basically completely flat fee levels. You've got it in front of you there until you get to £750,000 and above, and then it starts to inflect upwards. So Elaine, to come to you on that, because a big part of what agents do in that premium space to emphasise the value that they're bringing to the party is in your field, in staging and styling. And I think that we're recording this on the Monday after the Friday that was the Property-Pxrn conference, and your I may or may not have been in the pub for this bit, so I'm taking this on someone else's word. But your question to Kirsty was about the importance of staging and styling, and didn't she pick up on it in her presentation?
Absolutely. So it was an extraordinary moment, the Property-Pxrn conference. I put forward via Megan 18 a question to Kirsty Allsop when she was on the panel on stage, which basically said, in her experience of showing a huge range of people into properties of all different values all the way across the property market, did she believe that the presentation of a property made any difference? And her answer, 2 words, it's everything. Now you can imagine how, having spent 10 years trying quite hard to convince estate agents and of course homeowners by extension, that presentation is really important, to have somebody with Kirsty Allsop's profile in that audience, where there were hundreds of estate and letting agents in the audience, to be saying in 2 words, it's everything, was astonishing. And it really does emphasize for me everything that we've said for such a long time. Not only that we've said it's important, but the data capture that we've done, particularly the most recent long-term study that we did with our data and compared it to 20 EA data over the last 9 years, which evidenced exactly the same thing, that properties that have been staged by us are 5 times more likely to go at the original asking price, almost 20% more likely to go over asking, and 7 times less likely to go under asking. Now, if that's not a good reason for thinking about the presentation of the property before you bring it to market, along with Kirsty's endorsement now, I really don't know what else I can say. It's so important. And it's the value add for those agents in the prime space who are bringing value, more value, because they're wanting or they're able to charge higher fees. They have to be saying, we are bringing value by making sure you have the very best tools to get a quick sale with as high an offer as possible.
And what Elaine said there. So when Kirsty was on stage speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elaine, she said something along the lines of they were doing a viewing on a property and the owner had said, we will only allow you to film and do the viewing if you pay for professional cleaning beforehand or something. And Kirsty said to whoever it was, are the owners American? And they were like, how do you know that? So it's just such a usual thing in America, the cleaning, the staging, all that sort of stuff. Whereas I see photos online every day of listings where it's just horrendous how people put their properties on the market, but then also the estate agents allow it. They're reducing their chances of selling. And actually at the time of recording as well, the latest Rightmove house price index came out. And this data I originally saw about 3 years ago. Really interestingly, if a property on Rightmove gets an inquiry on day 1 of marketing versus after 2 weeks, it's 22% more likely to sell. So I'm sat in the seller's living room now and going, right, do you think that if we have lovely staging of a property, professional photos, videography, drone, presenter-led tour, if we have that on day 1, what do you think the chances are of getting an inquiry? Or let's wing it, let's maybe not stage it, let's maybe not have professional photos, whatnot, and then, might get an inquiry after a couple of weeks. So Rightmove have got the data there saying, if you get an inquiry on day 1, you're much more likely to sell. Sounds obvious. So how does a property need to present online to increase the chances of getting an inquiry? Well, being nicely staged would obviously be a big part of that.
And it's worth adding to that, this is the prime edition, the prime cut of this data. Elaine is anything but incredibly generous with sharing the insight she's got. This can be done yourself. You could, if you're on a very tight budget, in a modest house, you could prepare a house by following the address system that Elaine's created that she publishes in her book. And I'll let Elaine add to that. But while this is the prime edition, every agent could be maximising the opportunity of that house to sell by following her advice. And to me, I talk about marketing, obviously Elaine talks about staging, and the two sides of the same coin. It's funny, isn't it? The agents that do the best do more marketing. The agents who are more successful at selling houses do more staging. So it's kind of obvious what the answer should be. Is you should do marketing of a properly staged property. It's kind of, I wish it was more complicated. And I feel like I've earned my consultancy fee now for saying that. But it's kind of like, do more marketing of properly staged houses and you'll be all right. I mean, it's not complicated.
It's funny you say that. I was listening to David Warburton of The Complete Agent, and they do a podcast with Ian Storey and James Kendall, and they're brilliant what they do. And it was just a really, really short snippet episode that David had put out. And I think, Elaine, maybe but he does sort of an in-house version. I'm no expert on this world, so I'm guessing, in fairness, David probably won't be the full lemon and lime because he won't have the warehouse of furniture to throw at it. And I think it's much more about making the house presentable rather than staging. But where that line starts and stops, I wouldn't know. But he was saying if nothing else as a differentiator to offer that service was huge. And this podcast isn't about staging and styling, don't get me wrong, but it was interesting for me to hear how he positioned that as, yes, okay, a good service to get the house sold, but because no one else was offering it, they stood out.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly true, David. First of all, as Simon says, the first book, Sell High, Sell Fast, I wrote intentionally as a do-it-yourself guide, if you like, to staging, both for homeowners and for agents. Because we all know in our businesses that you give away an amount of information and people think, oh, wow, this person knows what they're talking about, reads it, thinks, oh my goodness, I haven't got time to do all of this, and picks up the phone, whatever field you're in. But if people really don't want the cost of staging, of professional staging, the information is there to do it. If an agent wants a home to look amazing, then actually they don't have to call in a professional stager. They can do it themselves. And we work with a number of estate agents in the UK and in the US. It's very common for a lot of the agents to do an element of staging, so to help with the presentation themselves before a property comes on the market. The line for that, and we strongly encourage agents to do it themselves, the line comes from that when they want furniture as opposed to accessories, and when they want the staging, so any additional pieces, so even accessories, artwork, and or furniture to stay in place for viewings as well as for the photos. But I think, just make a start, do something. Don't just take photos of the beds that are unmade. By the time those photos go online, as Simon said earlier, they've been through three people. They've been through the estate agent, they've been through the home seller, and they've been through the photographer. And all three of those people, plus possibly 2 or 3 other people in the office, have said, yes, these are fine. If the bed hasn't been made, if the washing up's still in the sink, if the loo seat's up, how many people do you need to say, actually, this isn't fine? It's not rocket science.
Rocket science. Shouldn't be rocket science. So come back to what you said earlier, that this premium market is exponentially more lucrative than the resi market because you get average prices and fees are higher. And in terms of why those fees are higher, I'm somewhat skewing an answer that came out of the report, because the question here for premium and prime agents was about what marketing they do to attract new listings. So this wasn't just marketing general. But what stood out to me was that it was the chart was showing all the different marketing mediums, online, offline, whatever, compared to correct me if I'm wrong, but compared to sort of the whole of the report, just compared to the premium and prime agents. And what stood out to me was that those premium agents were doing more of everything. That their bar on the chart was higher for every single medium you could get. Basically all the way down until you got to something like radio, which was about the 15th answer or something like that. Just the quantity and the output of marketing that they're doing is so much higher than it is in the resi market. So these fees are great, but there is an investment that's required to get those properties in the first place, and then it's supposed to justify the fee as well.
100%. I mean, they're treating the product that they're selling as the most valuable asset that needs proper marketing. So they are much more active across every channel, as you say. There's a real close parallel between agents who are growing and the prime agents, because we find the same behaviour there. And
just clarifying that, you talk about the agents that are growing in the whole of the market, and then prime agents specifically.
So prime agents represent a very small slice of the market in reality, because they're the prime agent, the 25%. So we have a sampling challenge there in terms of trying to break down the prime agents by growth agents and non-growth agents, but we can do it across the whole of market. So we can look at prime agents and we look at growth agents as 2 distinct cells, and what we identify is all of them do more marketing across more channels. So the reason why people are paying a premium is the first time someone will come across an agency is some of the marketing they've done for an existing product, an existing property rather, or some existing information they're sharing in the industry. Because they're doing more of it, when a home seller comes to them to say, look, I'm interested, they'll have a perception of a much more professional operation. Now, obviously the Savills, the Knight Franks, the John D. Woods, the Hamptons, they have a large operation behind that does this prime stuff. But for the self-employed, the independents who are operating in the prime space, the franchisers, they're also doing it too. They're just more active in their marketing. Their marketing looks better. Their presentation, they have professional photography, their staging. Everything is designed to maximize speed to sell rather than speed to market. And that you're willing to pay a premium for. I was taught when I was at Fine & Country, we may have that in both of our paths, is the best agents at Fine & Country didn't negotiate on price. They simply stated their price and they started talking about what they would offer, and most
Their
people,
fee, just
their
to be
fee,
clear.
their
Yeah,
fee,
yeah,
sorry, their fee.
yeah.
That was the fee. Almost take it or leave it.
Yep.
And then the classic, would be someone coming back and saying, well, your competitor would charge this much less. And the standard response should be, I think you may even have said this, which is, well, you came back to me for a reason. You came back to me because you saw something that I did that was worth more. That's why I have the fee that I have.
I think something else to add on to that as well in terms of that prime market and them charging a higher percentage on a higher value home is I see it time and time again when agents at the, let's just call it lower end of the market, mid end of the market, they want to go into the upper quartile. Let's say, what can I say here? Let's say on average, and I appreciate where some of these figures are, but just for ease of maths for me.
Yeah.
So let's say 500 grand house and they're used to charging 1% for £5,000 fee. They then get to £1 million property and they go, I'll tell you what, I'll do it at 0.75% and get 7.5 grand because that's 50% higher than my average fee. And I have that a lot when I go and see agents and I completely rip off your research in the voice of the agent.
Good.
And quote you, obviously, and say, look at what this research says, is that the higher the price points, they are willing to pay a higher percentage. So I think that speaks volumes as well, in that when you get the agents from the lower end trying to go into higher end, they think about, oh, let's cut down. What some of them also do, I think it's like the sexy thing at the moment is to, oh, let's try and get into higher end because they've seen Selling Sunset or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But they're offering a subprime service and marketing in prime market, which I think is why it's harder to get into it than what people have anticipated.
Are you seeing that come out in conversations with agents that you work with then?
Seeing what
That they're trying to get into it and it's not working because they're offering the same proposition?
I'm saying that's my
Perception.
I've seen it.
Feedback on it where but they're not even. And when I was on all three of us have been on Along the Towpath with Ross at Chapel Noble, and he said to me, I don't know if he asked you guys the same question, but he's like, what's an opinion you've got in the industry that could be controversial? And I said, estate agents charge too much money. And he's like, well, elaborate on that. I was like, there's so many agents out there charging 1%, they're not worth 1%.
No.
It's like all your listeners are going to be like writing and moaning at me now. But actually, there's agents out there who are charging 1.5% where they're worth 2.5%. But there's so many who are trying to get into that higher end and they're quoting 0.75% on £1 million property, but they're not doing staging. They're not doing twilight. And actually, just on the twilight thing, I'm digressing for a second, but if you were to go look at Dave Warburton and Ian Story's good examples, where they will be out at 9 o'clock at night on a shoot getting that twilight shot, and then the owners are going, that's what we're paying 2.5% for.
Yeah.
Whereas, the other agent is not even going to consider doing twilight.
Yeah. That's something clearly tangible that can demonstrate the value of bringing.
That's a tangible thing, isn't it? And I think I'd probably ripping this off from Alex Hormozy, but I've done this a few times recently in training sessions and got a whiteboard and said, right, if you overnight had to charge 5%, there's like, you can't do anything about it, you had to charge 5%, what would you do to warrant a 5% fee? And it's like, well, they would be chauffeur driven around to all the viewings, we'd negotiate on their behalf, we'd be taking them out for lunch, dinner, we'd be buying them football tickets. Like, okay, so all of a sudden you're bringing up all these things that equate to 5%. Again, going back to $1 million listing in New York, when you see the New York real estate brokers taking them out for lunch and dinner and chucking a few £100 on dinner, you're like, that's a madness. But then they're charging a few $100,000 on a fee.
Yeah.
So I think that too many agents are just sticking it online, waiting for the phone to ring. Whereas in that higher end of the market, where some are getting 2% plus fees, they're showing tangible difference.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a cliched line that I've heard before, and I've used myself as well, that in that market, that it's the business class service. These are people that want to pay, that would go on a plane and would want to pay for a business class seat, same altitude, same distance, same destination.
Same plane,
but they pay exponentially more for a business class service, and that's what they expect.
That's critical. It's exponentially more. It is so significantly more than the economy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. Is people, to quote Roscoe, it's about people who buy on value as opposed to price. They're perceiving. And I mean, Elaine and I talk about this a lot. I know Elaine is the vanguard of this argument. Is just introduce the services you can offer. They don't have to do them necessarily.
Yeah.
But that you present
Yeah, I like
You
that.
can choose to do professional staging. You can, things like we recommend, and this is the key thing, is we would recommend that you would have professional staging and then professional photography and then professional videography, because at this prime end, you're not talking about an insubstantial asset, and much rather get 2.5% than 0.75% on a much bigger asset. It's worth the investment. And the data that Elaine referred to, and I had the privilege of working when that data was coming together, it is dramatic.
Yeah.
The chance of you achieving a higher price on that property, the cost of staging is negligible relative to the increase you would get in the value of that property. Why would you not do it?
Absolutely. So taking...
Can I just come in on that for a second? Sorry, David. I, at the Property Mark 1 conference on Friday, I was introduced to the delegation that had come over from the National Association of Realtors to have a chat with them by the kind of hierarchy of Property Mark. And one of the guys there that I was speaking to, he looks after kind of luxury homeowners from his practice in Barbados. And he has clients who own seriously high value homes all over the world. So one client for him may own 5 or 6 multi-million houses in different locations in the world. And obviously, in the States, the model of buying and selling property is slightly different. And so the selling agents and the buying agents have to get to know one another really quite well. And he was saying that he is about to take a group of agents that he wants to work, basically to introduce clients to him, buying clients to him. But he is about to take, I think he said 6 or 8 of them. He doesn't want a group of any more than that. On an all expenses paid trip where he's taking them to the very best restaurants. He's accommodating them in the very best hotels. He's taking them to beautiful golf courses, private clubs, and flying them business class from one location to another to see what he does. And he said, I really, really need to do it like this, to throw a lot of money at this, so that they actually understand what clients who are in the luxury space think about. Because so many agents, and it's something that you've all heard me say as well, so many agents working in the luxury space don't live in the luxury space. And I don't mean just in luxury houses, but they don't live in the same world that their clients live in. And therefore, their perception of cost versus value is completely different. You will have heard me talk about, we in the yachting world, which is where I came from, some of the guys that are racing on the yacht racing circuits around the world are spending more money on one crew dinner at the end of an event than they would spend on staging a multi-million-pound house with us. Seriously, on one crew dinner. But because the agent doesn't live like that, doesn't understand that headspace, then in the agent's world, it's too expensive, and they will almost block the introduction. They'll block the recommendation because for the agent, it's too expensive, and therefore they can't imagine that they're going to recommend a costly service to their client. Whereas their client thinks, 20 grand, yeah, fine, crack on with it. We've had people in that space who have said to us, actually, if I pay you a bit more, could you put in more accessories or could you put in higher end furniture? Because they understand value. They're not worried about cost.
I love that.
I often make the point, a Patek Philippe, 120, 150,000 pound watch. It's a watch. You can get a Casio for 199, 299. They basically perform exactly the same function. They will accurately tell you the time. As Elaine says, if you operate in the ultra high net worth space or the high net worth space or even the affluent space, they have a very different expectation of value. And what you've got to understand if you're in the prime space is you're not selling against other estate agents. You're selling against other prime brands where a certain level of service is delivered. You know, if you go to a 5-star hotel, you know, I am a big fan of Premier-Inn. I'm not on commission, but hopefully I'll hear this and I'll get a fortune because of it.
Lenny Henry will be in touch.
And Lenny Henry will be in touch. And Premier-Inn is very good at a affordable business person's hotel.
Yeah.
It's always the same quality. The breakfasts are excellent. The shower's always good. The beds are comfortable. If you go to the Charlotte Street Hotel or Whatley Manor in Malmesbury and you're paying £750 to £1,250 a night, it's a very different experience. But you're not thinking about the cost of it.
Yeah.
The value you're getting is very, very different.
Yeah.
And you've got to think like you're playing a 5-star game. There's nothing wrong with 1-star hotels and 2-star hotels. They are 1-star and 2-star hotels. But the exponential difference of being a 5-star hotel or even these days a 6-star hotel is a different playing field altogether. And too many agents we deal with don't live that world. A funny example is a friend of mine works in a brand partnership company, and one of his people he was working with was Maybach, the car manufacturer. And Maybach wants to promote those cars. And to Elaine's point about, to your point about, you know, chauffeur driven everywhere. And basically Maybach said, we'll provide you chauffeur driven cars for your very ultra high net worth customers coming over. We'll pick them up in the Maybach. We'll take them to wherever they go. Now they did all these cars when they took me around. It was with a hotel chain. Maybach sold 4 Maybachs to one person. So the cost of that promotion to Maybach was nothing. So my advice to prime agents is you could potentially partner with a very nice local taxi company that happens to have very nice Mercs or very nice whatever. They'll get the promotion. These are people who will then come into the area in very nice houses and go, I'll use that taxi firm. I'll buy my car from that place because they're looking for the prime lifestyle that is the rest of their life.
That's right. And I think come back to the point you made there very eloquently, Elaine, is about putting yourself in that mindset. So my colleague Marie, who runs By Design in Northamptonshire, she said something to me once. She said when she was talking to a homeowner about the fee, and they'd gone on to the fee conversation, the same thing about put yourself in that mindset, they related it to the cars on the driveway. And he had a Range Rover on the driveway, which is a £100,000 car probably. Well, they bought a Range Rover. He said, that's what you're spending on a car, which is functionally the same as a Kia or something. Nothing wrong with Kias, but that is a completely different market that they're aiming for. And that is the mindset of those vendors, is that they are willing to pay more for the service, be that perceived or actual in the case of the car, that offering delivers them. And part of that is brand as well. And I think just one final thing, and then I'll shut up, is come back to what you said, Simon Gates, earlier, about what I think a lot of agents get unraveled with is when they attack that premium space, and I'll just use a really weird metaphor, is the same chocolate bar in a different wrapper. And I think the homeowners can, the other side of that coin is they can see through that pretty quickly, where they're like, well, you're just charging me more for the same thing. And I don't want that either. I don't want to pay business class for an economy ticket either.
It's worse than that. It's the same chocolate bar in the same wrapper, and they're trying to sell it to someone who only buys the best chocolate that's available.
Yeah.
And it's like, you wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's actually a name technically for what we're talking about. It's called a Veblen. A Veblen.
I've already forgotten what that is.
A Veblen. A Veblen
Right.
is more desirable because it's more expensive.
Yeah.
So you want to be a Veblen as an agent. You want to be more expensive. Modern houses are master at this. They have a queue. They have a waiting list for people to deal with them.
Yeah.
Because they will only deal with the right number of customers with the right type of properties. And if you want them to sell your house, you have to wait.
Yeah.
FOMO, fear of missing out. And they're very much a Veblen good. They can pretty much charge whatever they want.
Veblen, that's really cool. Sorry, Simon, were you going to say something?
I don't necessarily know how much relevance this has to what we've just been discussing, but something that was going on in my mind when everyone was talking was, have you seen there's 2 different guys or companies on TikTok, and one is people ringing off and go, hey, I need a private jet. And then they're like the broker to sort out the private jet.
Is it the guy in the office with the tie on?
I don't know about that. I'm not sure if it's got a guy with a tie. But you've got one who does private jets. So someone rings up. So Ryan Serhant is a good example. Ryan Serhant rings up, hey, it's Ryan. I've got someone in New York looking to buy looking to go and view houses in LA. We need a private jet to pick us up from New York. Takes to LA. They need XYZ on the flight. And he's like, yeah, this is what the price is. He's like, cool, they don't care. Let's get on with it. And then someone else has done that in the yachting world.
Is this Johnny Dodge?
I don't know. I don't know.
He's got the name that sounds made up.
Is that what it? So yeah, I would say to any agents watching is go and find that on TikTok, the yacht guy and the private jet guy. And then the other thing, just that I've seen Rory Sutherland say on TikTok is where's the best place to try and sell a Rolls Royce is at a private jet event. So like if you're looking to go and buy a private jet, a Rolls Royce looks like a discount item that you're buying at the at the till at the end.
At the till, yeah.
It's anchoring. It's
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
it's a very expensive thing next to a even more ridiculously expensive thing.
it's price
Doesn't
tag.
look expensive.
Yeah. It was Simon Cowie who put me onto that Johnny Dodge, and I said, surely this guy's name's made up. But it wasn't. And what is really interesting, what he does on socials is he will record phone calls he has with clients, and the amount of money they just have sitting on account is absolutely eye-watering. We were talking about all that, and Simon was saying he has kind of similar conversations with clients as I just don't know how I can film that and put it on socials, how I can actually make that work. But that is what occurs at that end of the market, and that's why these fees are so achievable. Ironically though, Simon Leadbetter, come to you on a question that I had, which was about the amount of marketing that the prime agents do, which is in-house compared to an external team. And would you have expected that to have been the other way around? If they're doing so much more marketing that we said earlier, would they not be using external teams more than they would be doing it themselves, so to speak?
So they're more like in the overall population of agents to use an external team. There's only a small number of them who use an external team. It's about 11% versus 6%. What worries me, and it's just there's even more opportunity for prime agents here, is they're more likely to use non-marketing staff.
Okay.
So they get someone who isn't a marketer to do their marketing. And that to me is a bit of a miss, because one of the reasons why they may have to do more of everything is they're just very, very, very busy. And the reality is if they, and Elaine and I work together, I work with various different companies, I wouldn't try and stage my own property. No. I would ask Elaine to help me with that. I wouldn't try and sell my own house. I would speak to a really good agent to sell my house. Yeah. I wouldn't try and video the house. There's a lot to be said. As Redadair said, if you think hiring a professional is expensive, wait until you hire an amateur. Yeah. Marketing is so important to your business. If the two levers are marketing really well staged and presented houses, get professionals to do those things. Now they can be employed or they could be agency, but don't give it as a part-time job to someone who's also doing some negotiating or some admin or something else within the business. Give it to a dedicated marketer, just as you would give it to a dedicated stager or a dedicated person who knows how to build a prime brand like By Design, for example. Find the right expert and associate with them and get them to do it for you, either as staff or as agency. So that kind of surprised me, but also what it did say to me, if you're from the prime sector, you've got an even bigger opportunity than this magazine, this report already says. Because you put a dedicated marketer on this, you're going to supercharge your growth.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast, and chances are if you're listening to this podcast, then the premium property market is of some interest to you. But how interesting actually is it? Well, we can tell you that with a free personalised premium market report on the premium property market in your area. It shows you firstly the value of the premium market around you, and it also shows an in-depth competitor analysis as to what your competition are doing, the good, the bad, and in some detail as well. So you can perhaps make a strategy of how you would take some of that market for yourself if you wanted to. All you need to do is go to bydesignhomes.com/report. That's bydesignhomes.com/report, and we'll send it to you within a day or two. That's it. Back to the episode. I don't know whether it's just me reading this. Tell me what you guys think. But I found it very hard to not envisage who the person was. Like, not as an individual, but like trying to build a little profile in my head of what these people are, both from the volume agent and then in from the prime cut element of it. And I think in the volume one, I had sort of, this is very stereotypical, just like...
Careful, careful. We're not with him.
It's only so far you can budge over. Like a national chain of estate agents on the high street, very traditional setup, and that's what they do. In the prime end of it, I imagined it almost being like one person, or maybe one person, an assistant that was very much a personal agent in that sense that was doing this. And so when I thought about the marketing element of it, I thought, oh, maybe this is because they are doing it all themselves and it's very, very personal, rather than it being a bigger company that has lots of other people and departments that they can work with as it would be in the resi market with a big national chain on the high street.
My biggest problem when I ran marketing in the prime space for various big companies is agents who weren't busy enough. Because they were basically selling fewer houses at higher fees.
Well, didn't that come out in this? It said that in the concerns, a list of concerns.
And they have more time on their hands.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want as a central marketing department is an agent trying to be an enthusiastic amateur at the marketing, because they'll start doing very strange things.
Yeah.
And they would do well to go, they're brilliant at what they do, they should spend their time building relationships, but they should leave marketing to the professionals. You know, I remember used to joke at one very prime brand where the average fees were ridiculous, is if those folks could just sell one more house a year, we'd grow the business by 25%. Because that's how many houses they sold a year, 4. But they made a lot of money from those 4.
I get it.
Can I just come back on that a little bit, Simon? And feeding into that, and I, a little bit like you, David, I read that bit of the voice of the agent as more to do with personal brand than with the overall brand of the agency. And a little bit like, so, you know, if I just outline a way that Simon and his team work with us, is that we give them essentially the strategy piece, you know, go off and create as a marketing strategy, go off and create a core set of messages that we need to get out, and a way of how we're, you know, just a strategy around how we're going to get them out there. But at the same time, we expect every single member of the team to also be creating messages and rolling that out, some of which is more about what they're doing in their day-to-day, but just to keep out on the social media marketing. And I wonder whether, so I would say that we're very much a mix of outsourcing our marketing to a team and doing it internally. And I wonder whether some of the prime brands were similar. So, you know, if you take some of the big prime brands, for example, that also trade on personal brand, the head office, if you like, has got a strategy and core messaging that goes out. But each of those agents, every time they go to see a property, every time they're out and about, is also adding into that.
I mean, I think Elaine's made a very good point there. And you know, it's andism as opposed to orism. I think we're both probably would both say the same thing. What's interesting, I think, is with those larger corporate brands I reference, is I think one of their failings is they don't let their teams do their personal brand enough.
Yeah.
And I think one of the advantages of some of the newer prime brands, by design obviously exists, other names are available, is they do absolutely encourage their agents to build their personal brand businesses, and that's really important. You know, I'm friends, acquaintances of Daniel Daggers, and one thing he was always in trouble with at Knight Frank was how much he was building his personal brand.
That's a great point. And by the way, Elaine, I think you've absolutely smashed your diagnosis of what's going on there. But from your point, just to pick that up, Simon, because there's something I wanted to talk to you guys about as well, was, I agree. I think that it's kind of a superpower of smaller companies competing in that premium market at the moment, because the bigger companies, in fairness to them, can't sometimes let that level of freedom go from, just call it social media, to be lazy about it. And I wrote about this in one of our newsletters, but do you remember was it the Euros a few years ago when someone from Savills tweeted something that they definitely should not have tweeted about? Big uproar, you know, potentially some brand damage on Savills as a result of that, action had to be taken and so on. So you can understand why they have to lock that down a bit more, whereas the smaller companies can be a bit more agile and give that freedom, and the agents can build their personal brand. Now, from that, and this is something that I wanted to ask you about that came out in this report. I'll give you 2 things here. One is that this actually wasn't in the report, but in 2024, the top 10 brands for listing properties over £750,000 and above, they all lost market share, which I found really interesting. And yet, this is in the Voice of the Agent survey, that only 13% of agents handle properties between £1 and £2 million, and only 3% over 5 million. So we're getting onto the prime stuff there, I appreciate, but it is still such a kind of niche of the market. So I just make you a bet. I recorded a bit of content the other day and made this bet in it. I said, I bet you that you can name 10 agents you compete with for the resi market around where you live right now. So say you're in Newport Pagnell, you could list 10 off right now. Probably asking the wrong people here. Try and do the same. Give me 10 for who you'd compete with for a premium property around where you operate. I'll give you 10 if you can. Maybe I'll retract that. I'm not going to ask you, especially not you. You'll know the answer to that.
Fair comment there.
So why do you think so few agents do it then? Because if we've established that it's exponentially more lucrative, there's less competition. What's going on there? What do you think it is?
I would say, just to start with, the personality type of an estate agent.
Okay.
So if you think how much the self-employed world has grown in recent years, if an estate agent goes from, let's say, corporate world, and they're literally going out on a few valuations a day and it's just relentless, and then day one happens, and like, let's say they sell a house a month and they're earning more money than they ever did when they were a manager on High Street, yet they'll still feel like they're not doing enough.
Yeah.
So I think like the whole volume piece is an attraction, because without going off on the whole like pie chart situation, but how many traditional estate agents are loving pie charts and saying, look at how many houses we sold. It's actually like, well, how many houses did you have to list to sell that number?
Yeah.
And actually who's more profitable. I know of a traditional estate agency that does 7 figures from an office, doesn't make any profit. Yet hearing what Simon is saying there, you could have an agent selling £1 million plus properties, selling a few of them a year, and being much more profitable than the office that has to have loads of people. But it's that kind of the chaos and the busyness that I think a lot of the personality types who work in the estate agency enjoy, and they get attracted to that like moths to a flame.
Yeah. I get that. I, to be honest, I'd be attracted to that as well. I think everyone likes to be part of that busy environment, don't they? You kind of get a buzz off of it, right? It's understandable.
I think your competitor set's changed quite significantly. You've got, if you're thinking of, I've got a £5 million house, there'll be 2 or 3 names that spring to mind immediately who you would talk to. You know, you would probably think Knight Frank. You would probably think Savills. Increasingly think Fine and Country. You know, you guys, you're challenging now, you're moving up the ranks. And you know, there's a few brands. If you're a local independent agency and your competitor set on a day-to-day basis is all the other local independents. I mean, I know a really, really strong local agency where I live, and he said to me very honestly, he said, I just don't see the benefit of taking on these kind of listings. Yeah. It's so taken over by that. You know, we'll have to argue against the Knight Franks and the Savills, where almost the seller has already said, we're seeing you out of a courtesy, but in reality, we're going to go with Knight Frank. We're going to go with Savills because we want that board outside our house. And we used to talk about the prime agent premium, you know, whether the status still stacks up, but we used to say that you'll add 5% of the value of your house if you put the right board outside it.
Yeah, remember you
because
saying
what
that.
you'll say is this house is literally best of breed.
Yeah.
And that's a lot to take on if you're selling flats at £100,000 and then trying to sell a 2, 3, 4, 5 million pound house.
Well, that's borne out in the survey as well, because it says in the £1 million plus marketplace, the top 2 brands control 13% of the market. I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty big. But I think, come back to your point there, I find that quite exciting because one, is, as you said earlier, those big brands are all losing market share. But when I was talking to agents sort of at the coalface, they love being the second agent in to one of those big household names.
Absolutely.
For a whole load of reasons, like absolutely.
And they'll have a local knowledge that is way beyond. But it is an interesting, I presented this on Friday at Property Mark 1. It's really interesting. At that top end, you've got 2 brands taking a huge chunk of the market. But we got 28 to look at every single postcode district in the United Kingdom. And the top 2 brands on average, so it's an average of averages, but it's an average, take 37% market share. So if you're a local independent, I mean genuinely a local independent around a postcode district, you're going to take 37% market share. If you're a top 2 brand, you're going to take high 20% market share. So decide where you play, local specialism or price specialism, and you've got a better chance of winning. Trying to fight both battles is really hard.
Makes total sense. Simon Gates, maybe one for you. And I think I interpreted this right from the survey. But it says fewer prime agents predict house price rises. And I think the market at the moment is particularly interesting. So what are we, mid-June as we're recording this now?
Yeah.
What are you seeing from your stats as you look at the market at the moment and looking at, say, May's numbers as well, but what's going on in that kind of premium space, or at least what has been going on this year?
So sorry, fewer prime agents think that house prices are going to rise,
Yes, sorry.
whereas
Than
the average estate
the agent
agent
thinks they'll rise more. Yeah.
Interesting. I think so. I subscribe to a lot of the information that comes out of the likes of Knight Frank, Savills, and a bit of Hamptons. And I'd recommend anyone listening or watching this does subscribe to their content, because it is very good. I think that they much more have their finger on the pulse when it comes to political and economic factors that impact the property market, such as swap rates or what's going on with Donald Trump, or wars going on wherever they are in the world. Whereas I think average day to day, who's in a volume market where things just, if they're priced right, marketed right, they just churn. Yeah. Whereas you could get a really incredible property at 2, 3, 5 million quid, but there might be someone there who, I don't know, they're not employed, but if Elon Musk does something crazy and they've got shares in Tesla and their total value like plummets overnight, they're then going, hang on a minute, I'm a bit nervous about buying that property. So I think that the agents in the prime market very much have a finger on the pulse as to what's happening in a wider sense, politically and economically. Whereas I think the average agent, what I'm seeing in the prices is just like off the cuff comment here. I don't have any data to back this up, but if you look at Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the north of the country, that's where property prices are performing best. Mm-hmm. Typically in a higher interest rate environment, those areas are the ones that have better house price growth. Whereas when you have interest rates where they are right now, your Londons and your southeast, where the stretches on affordability are higher, they tend to do a lot better in terms of house price growth in lower interest rate markets. Does that make sense, what I've just said there? Yeah. So, yeah, I think that just to box it all off, just the prime agents are going to be speaking to a lot more wealthier people and business people who perhaps maybe a little bit more nervous, whereas maybe the people who work 9 to 5s are, what's what I'm looking for? They kind of got the blinkers on, they're comforted from not realising the reality of what potentially.
I think there's probably some pragmatism to that, isn't there? Because if you're selling a property that's north of £1 million, there's fewer people that can buy that, and you're probably looking at a bit more of an international audience with currency exchange rates and so on that start to make a difference. So these global events do have more of an impact than if you're buying locally and selling locally lower down the market. It's more of a commoditized product.
Yeah, let's say someone in a 3-bed semi has a kid or another kid, and they're like, we need to upsize, we're running out of space. Whereas when someone's got a few million quid to spend and they've got a 10,000 square foot property, it's actually, it's a desire rather than the death, divorce, debt kind of thing.
Yeah. You seen that in the...
I have a view, but I'm sure Elaine, Elaine lives this day in, day out with staging.
Yeah, we live it day in, day out, and I don't necessarily agree about the death, divorce, debt. We see exactly the same in prime space, that's very, very often a factor in why people are selling properties. I think what happened, and for me, where I read this data in the Voice of the Agent, was very much legacy of what happened at the end of last year with the budget, with this new government coming in. And unusually, the budget that came in with the new Labour government impacted the upper end of the economic kind of, what do I mean? You know, the society, it impacted the wealthier people in society much more significantly than any other budget has done for many, many years. And in particular, things like, just threatening pensions, for example, in inheritance tax, in the slightly longer term, reviewing whether pensions ought to come into an inheritance tax strategy, I think then makes people in that end of the market start to think a little bit more about property and hanging on to property and perhaps not selling and just using their property differently in terms of wealth transfer than they necessarily have done previously. I agree with Simon about the impact on share prices, for example, that people are nervous of the wars going on around the world and the Trump administration and the impact of that on share values in portfolios around the world. And I think all of that is really changing how people are in the upper end of the market, how they're trading their property, because they are still trading for death, divorce, debt, all the things that everybody else has impacting, but they also have a whole load of other factors where their property is part of their wealth transfer to the next generation. And one of the things that we're seeing is that although the government has wanted, and successive governments have wanted to try and move the wealthier, older generation from bigger premium properties to downsize, then the budget directly conflicted with that by basically saying, up to £1 million, you can transfer your property without inheritance tax. And therefore, people with slightly lower value properties, we're now seeing trade up to, in the older generation, they're trading up to something bigger because the tax on that is much less than potentially on a pension portfolio. So they really have shot themselves in the foot, in my opinion.
That is so interesting. Yeah.
I mean, the reason why Pakistan, Elaine and I speak a lot.
You knew she was going to say that, didn't you?
I've heard this, and it's a really eloquent description of what the problem is. Knight Frank Savills have reported about a softening in the top end of the market. I think we are seeing global wealth just going. They're a bit more uncertain about what's going on in the world at the moment. Yeah. We should not be surprised that a Labour government has targeted the most wealthy. That's what Labour governments historically have and should probably do because they're a Labour party. That for people who work in business with national insurance, if you've got kids, and again, this is a group of people who are more likely to send their kids to private school. Yep. They've got VAT on private school. There's the inheritance tax. There's all the implications they put in around the fact that when you transfer a business ownership, that's coming down the line is kind of an implication in terms of, I forget the name of the specific clause, but it's kind of like you don't have the benefits you used to do capital transfers and things.
So entrepreneurs relief or something.
Entrepreneurs, thank you very much, and you'd help me there. So inheritance tax, non-dom status, again, it's a small slice, but it's still a chunk of this group of people. Yeah. And there are countervailing forces of Trump is doing a lot for the Edinburgh property market, because there's a lot of Americans looking to escape to Edinburgh because they like the prices and the place up there. We're seeing a squeeze at this wealthier end. So I think there isn't negativity in market. There's more caution and more uncertainty. Yeah. Where I think for most properties in most areas, the rules of economics apply. Demand exceeds supply.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas in these kind of properties, actually, there's more of an equilibrium, so it's a bit more of a sensitive market, in my humble opinion.
And maybe, coming full circle, perhaps why these vendors are more willing to pay higher fees, because there is more of a challenge in the property for them to manage, potentially, than it being a commodity product that's going to sell.
If you were to look at the statistics, because at the time of recording, I'm late in sending you the monthly article. Don't know about anyone
I think else. We might all be.
No, so Elaine, no.
Oh my word!
Okay. Well, mine will.
We hang our heads in shame.
Mine will be done this. Mine will be done this evening.
I mean,
teachers.
I've not done it either, so we look like three naughty schoolboys. He's telling us.
When I was doing a part of my data collation this morning for it, above £1 million. At the moment, on Rightmove, I can't remember, it was about low 20s as a percentage of properties were under offer.
Right.
And if you do whole of market, it would be double that.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Again, there's going to be less buyers for properties above £1 million, right? But going back to the point of why would someone pay an estate agent a higher fee? Because then, there's a lower chance that they're going to sell it.
Yeah.
So the estate agent needs to kind of factor that into their costings.
Yeah.
Right, because you kind of, I think Ian Preston at Preston Baker talks about it, but like the fee, if an estate agent has to figure out if they only sell 50% of what they list, kind of when I sell your house, David, you're kind of not just paying the fee to sell your house, you're paying me a fee for all the ones I couldn't sell.
Yeah.
So I think that's
one of the scary things about the whole market is with an average sold of about half the properties listed are sold, 0.75%. That's basically the fee on 2 houses because one of them hasn't sold. So it's actually half that.
Yeah.
So we got ourselves into a terrible mess in fees in this country. You know, we're getting the Americans over, the National Association of Realtors, talking to my friends in South Africa and Australia. Even our highest fees should be higher, in my humble opinion. We should be charging significantly more in fees, and we need to raise the bar. But that's going to have an industry-wide kind of conversation and a whole mindset shift.
Yes.
Because we've conditioned sellers in the UK to pay next to nothing to sell their houses.
I had very, very funny conversations when I first came into this business 10 years ago. One of my conversations that first of all I was shocked about, and then I used it as entertainment, was to go into an estate agent office or to speak to an estate agent and say to them, how much does it cost you to sell a house? And it's a really interesting question because 99.9% of estate agents have absolutely no idea whatsoever how much it costs them to sell a house. And therefore, the number they're putting on what they're going to charge is an arbitrary, stick your finger in the air figure, because does it cover the costs? Don't know. It's really, really fascinating.
I want you to know that I
Not in the slightest.
I knew the answer to that when I was an estate agent. So if you challenge me on a fee, I'd say this is how much, based on the units I sell per year, to Elaine's point, how much it costs me to run the business to turn the lights on. Like if I was to discount it, I'd literally be losing money on your listing. Does that make business sense to you, Mr. Lindley? Like,
and you don't have to name how much that price point was, but what was the fee percentage that you were sort of arguing between, that you would use that in conversation?
well, I'd say typically in the office I ran for 5-6 years, net profit margin would have been 15-20%. So when they're trying to go from let's say 1.5 to 1.25, you're like, I literally, I'm going to be doing it at cost.
Yeah.
And I can't, what's the point in like, and I think having that conversation with someone when it comes to selling their property, like, I'm not a charity. You want me to go back to the office to an excited room of negotiators wanting to sell your property.
Yeah.
But if I come back and go, it's an average fee, an average house and a pretty ludicrous price, they're not going to pick up the phone. And I used to say as well, Mr. Lindley, if I do cut my fee, what do you think is the first thing I'm going to cut back on? It's not going to be what I pay myself. It's not going to be the rent on the office. It's not being negotiated. It's the marketing of your house.
Yeah.
So you end up losing out.
It's quite profound, and Christopher Watkin and others talk about this a lot, is we're so desperate to win an instruction, we lower our fees, but we'd do better and we'd be more profitable if we didn't win it. Because we're losing money on some of those listings.
Yeah.
And it's insane to go, as Lord Sugar says, anyone can sell a tenner for £5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what a lot of agents are doing, is they're going, no, we'll keep stashing. So they go, yeah, I've won the instruction. Then they'll only sell half of the things they win. And actually, on each of the instructions they get at that level of fee, they're losing the business money. I think agency owners have a responsibility to train their people of the actual cost. I mean, it's a great question from Elaine. I might even include it in the next The Voice of the Agent. But it's kind of like, it's such a simple question. What does it cost to sell a house? What are you charging your customers? We all know as business people, you have to sell your product for more than it costs you to produce.
Just to add a point on what you've just said there, Simon, I used to say to the team in my office that, God, what am I trying to say here? The cost, or what it was worth, so what each appraisal was worth that was booked was the same as what it cost to run the office for a day. It's like if we book an appraisal a day based on whether we sell it or not, just basic conversions, every day, if you book one appraisal, we'll keep the lights on. So each day it's kind of celebrating. If we book 2 today, great news, we've kept the lights on and we've got money coming in.
Yeah.
But if you're booking less than one appraisal a day, then it's costing us to run this office.
Love it.
I think the same applies, to be perfectly honest, the same applies in staging. You've all heard me bang on about these days, the difference between cheap staging and good staging, and it's very similar. There are stagers out there who are really, really wanting to win the business and are cutting fees for staging, and what that means is that you get cheaper furniture, you get less of a service, you get less, people have got less capacity to do a really good job. And there are a lot of business people, and it probably applies across a lot of different industries, where people are not really in business. They've just got quite an expensive hobby that they quite like getting up and going to. And I think property seems to me, having come from different industries, but property seems to me a really good example of where there are a lot of people around with very expensive hobbies.
Fair enough. So, okay, so we're kind of coming to the end of this, and I think that there's so much in this, and this is just one section of the Voice of the Agent that we could talk about. So just before we wrap it up, Simon, tell us what's coming down the track with the Voice of the Agent project, the surveys, the rest of this year, and onwards from there. What can people look forward to?
Yeah, so we're now in our third year, and a great research guy at Rightmove, because the last survey we did in 2004 was one big survey. I think you probably got this propping a door somewhere. It was a big, thick wedge. It took an hour to complete, and that was a lot of survey to ask people to do. So this year we broke it down into quarters, so we have quarterly surveys. So we've done the market, sales, lettings, marketing. This second edition we've done portals, PropTech, AI and sustainability.
Yep.
We're currently surveying, because the 4th of July is 1 year of the new Labour government. But we're also surveying housing, and we're talking about regulation and pricing in the industry. And in the final quarter of the year, we do the voice of the consumer, where we basically take everything agents think and we compare it to what homeowners, tenants and landlords think.
Yep.
So that kind of gives a comparison of how, as an industry, we're out of kilter with the market or we're aligned. We're changing it quite significantly in 2026, is we're going to go monthly. So actually we're going to do a monthly survey. We're working with a big research house where actually we'll do genuinely random sampling of agents across the United Kingdom. And that'll make it much quicker to produce, a bit more representative. It leans a bit to the high end of the survey at the moment, which is kind of like basically my network and connections from the past. But it's got better and better over the 3 years and is more balanced. We're more in line with what the distribution of house values in the UK is than we were in the first year. And also next year, we're going to add an international aspect as well. And a date for the diary, just to pencil in as an example, is just hold it at the moment, just hold the date. The 7th of November, Friday the 7th of November, we are planning the Voice of the Agent conference, probably in Milton Keynes.
At Simon's house.
At Simon's house. But we're going to basically bring, hopefully, everyone who's on this podcast and a few others to basically talk at that event about what the whole year of the surveys told us, and then launch the 2026 survey. So it's a big year, and all I'd stress to anyone is, the thing to remember about this report is it's completely free. You can just go to thevoiceoftheagent.com and download this report completely for free. We did this for selfish reasons initially, but once we produced it, it was like, why don't we just give the industry, I'm a passionate advocate for the industry, and I just thought, if we can all learn from the best, we can be better as an industry.
100%, well said. So in short, there's a lot going on with the Voice of the Agent.
It's a bit busy. It's a bit busy at Unchained Towers at the moment. And yes, I'm actually only 22. Well, it's aging me.
Yeah, fair enough. I shan't push on that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So all that leaves me to say is, Elaine, Simon, thank you so much for today. And also, for those that are listening, first of all, thank you for listening to this. Secondly, if you haven't read The Voice of the Agent, I would certainly recommend you do so and participate, because it's only as good as the submissions that Simon receives. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed to Premium Estate Agency News, which features articles from the two Simons, Elaine and I, every single month completely free, then you can do so. I'll put the link to it in the description here. And all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of Prime Cut. We really appreciate it, and see you in the next episode.